Charlie Morton is heading back to where his major league career began. The Cubs have extended Jed Hoyer, and Luis Rojas will be returning as Mets manager in 2021. Hello, everyone, and welcome into this Tuesday, November 24th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports, available on demand at 110sportsmedia.com, on YouTube, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Just search for 110 Sports. We're also today on the show going to be discussing the off season for the NL and AL West teams today to wrap up our off-season division previews. But we are going to start, of course, by talking about the big story from today on this Tuesday, the biggest free agent signing so far this offseason. That's going to be our big topic to start the show. Here's a look at our full rundown for today's broadcast. We're going to start with the news of Charlie Morton signing with the Atlanta Braves. We're not going to do a typical top four today, because there aren't really four stories that I think deserve a significant amount of attention on their own. We are going to go through some other notable headlines from the past few days and quick hits. We're going to talk about the Cubs' extension of Jed Hoyer, some news from a Mets press conference yesterday, and some other recent headlines. We're going to, as we have the last couple of shows now, go through some of the latest hot stove rumblings, reports, rumors about players who may be interested in teams and teams who may be interested in players in free agency, on the trade market, and so forth. And then today, our big topics, we're going to wrap up our division off-season previews. As I mentioned, we've gone through the East divisions, we've gone through the Central divisions. We're going to wrap things up with the AL and NL West, and we'll get out of here with what's on deck, what you can expect in terms of potential deadlines and big key dates in the baseball world in the next few days, few weeks, and what you can expect here at 110 Sports. So let's jump into our big headline this morning, and that is the biggest signing of the young offseason is now official, as the Atlanta Braves inked veteran right-hander Charlie Morton to a one-year $15 million deal this morning. The team announcing that news just a short time ago. Morton has spent the last two seasons with the Tampa Bay Rays, and the team declined his 2021 option for the exact same price, $15 million, after the conclusion of the World Series. But Morton will now end up returning to the team that drafted him back in 2002. Morton pitched in the majors for Atlanta for one season before he was traded to Pittsburgh. He was there for several years. He then spent time with the Phillies, the Astros, and then the Tampa Bay Rays. Now, Morton really wasn't all that great of a starter for the first several seasons of his career, Atlanta, and then for Pittsburgh, 6 or 7 years in Pittsburgh, and he wasn't really all that great. He wasn't really all that impressive at all. But he broke out in his early to mid-30s with the Houston Astros, and really, on a start-by-start basis, he was a top 20, maybe even a top 15 starting pitcher in baseball when healthy from 2017 to 2019. In those 3 seasons, 2 of them with the Astros, 1 with the Rays, Morton had a 45-16 record, a 3.24 ERA, and 600 strikeouts in 500 innings, approximately. So from that 3-year stretch, once he got to Houston, he sort of had this late career renaissance and was just outstanding, and he carried that over. It wasn't just a one-year thing. He carried it over into year 2 with the Astros, carried it over into year 1 with the Tampa Bay Rays. Now, 2020 was a down season for Morton. He posted 4.74 ERA in 9 regular season starts and experienced some decrease in velocity. He's dealt with some shoulder problems, which is a concern. But a positive thing, he did succeed well, return to form in the postseason. He posted a 2.70 ERA in a couple of postseason starts, 3 or 4 postseason starts, I believe it's 4, and that was certainly encouraging. He was lights out until his final start of the postseason, and his velocity was back up. That was encouraging for a guy who had had some shoulder issues, had seen a decrease in velocity. It was back up in the postseason, so that was an encouraging sign. Morton has contemplated retirement in recent years, and ESPN's Buster Olney tweeted earlier this morning that the perception of interested teams was that Morton was likely either going to take one of 2 options, either return to the Rays or sign with Atlanta, that those were his main 2 objectives for free agency is one of those two things to happen. And so Atlanta it is at a higher price than the Rays were willing to pay for him, because the Rays declined a $15 million option. He signs for $15 million. The Rays weren't willing to pay him that much. The Braves clearly were. And my take is this is a really good deal for the Braves. Charlie Morton will join a rotation with Max Fried, with Ian Anderson, who we talked about before, who broke out. Fried stepped up as a real ace caliber pitcher. Anderson broke out in the postseason. He's very young, and there's just so much potential there. And so Morton will join a rotation that includes Max Fried, Ian Anderson, Mike Soroka, I should say, is coming back, supposed to come back early in this 2021 season. Of course, he started the season as the team's ace. He was their opening day starter in 2020. He tore his Achilles. And that's a tricky injury to come back from, and come back from at 100% right out of the gate. But he should be back pretty soon. The club also added, as we talked about here on the show, Drew Smyly last week. And they've got a few young options like Kyle Wright, who they're not going to be counted on. Those young players aren't going to need to be counted on for big innings out of the gate, which is a good thing. And of course, starting pitching depth was a concern for Atlanta this past season, with Soroka going down. Fried stepped up, Anderson stepped up down the stretch, but there was a lack of third, fourth, fifth options that you really could count on. And now they have that with Morton, with Smyly, and Morton doesn't have to be the guy. He doesn't have to necessarily get back to the numbers of his best seasons a couple of years back, because, right, he's not expected to take on that role. They've got Fried and Anderson and Soroka and Smyly and Charlie Morton in that rotation. So that's a deep rotation in terms of guys who have great upside. And as far as, yes, there is risk with signing Charlie Morton, because there's a chance that he's just done. There's a chance that he can't hold up over the course of a full season. There's a chance he isn't able to, his velocity goes back down, he gets hurt. He's just done. I mean, he's an older pitcher. So there's risk there for the Braves, but the upside is really high. The price isn't all that high. He's coming off an encouraging postseason. That's got to help from the Braves' perspective. And he's going to bring veteran leadership to a group of young pitchers in that Braves rotation. So I will say props to Atlanta for going out and getting the guys they wanted. 2 of the 3 free agent signings. Robbie Ray goes back to Toronto, and then of course you have Marcus Stroman taking the qualifying offer with the Mets. So the 2 pitchers who have actually the 2 players who've actually signed in free agency with a new team, the high caliber players, of the players in the top 100, top 50, both those moves, both players who've changed teams have been to the Atlanta Braves. Charlie Morton from the Rays and Drew Smyly from the Giants. So props for Atlanta for going out and getting the guys that they wanted. And I saw comments from, I believe it was their general manager today, saying they had a group of something like 3 or 4 starters they were interested in, and they just went out and got 2 of them. And they're really happy with it. And they stayed within a good budget. They didn't spend a lot of money. They didn't have to because of the pitchers they already had. So props to them for doing that. I have to say also, there's going to be a wide range of potential outcomes for this Atlanta rotation in 2021. The downside is, Morton could be hurt, could get hurt, he could be ineffective, he could be done. Smyly has been up and down, so you can't really count on him on a high level. And there could be regression from guys like from Anderson and Fried. Soroka may not come back at 100%. So there's a wide range there, but the upside is one of the best rotations in baseball. If you have Morton pretty effective, Smyly continuing the gains that he made in 2020, Fried and Anderson carry over their success, Soroka comes back pretty quickly and pretty effectively, all of a sudden you have a recipe for an incredibly deep and talented rotation. I think you have to believe it's going to be significantly better than this past season, and that's a season where the Braves got to the NLCS, got a game away from making it to the World Series. And that great offense is still going to be intact, largely. The same guys are going to be back for the most part. So you have to be feeling good if you're the Atlanta Braves right now. All right, let's move on to quick hits. Some other items of note, some headlines for the past few days that I don't think any of these require 10 minutes of discussion, but I think they're important things to note from the past few days. The Cubs announced Monday that they've agreed to a 5-year contract extension with President of Baseball Operations Jed Hoyer, which will run through the 2025 season. Hoyer has been with the Cubs since 2011 and was just recently promoted from general manager to president of baseball operations last week, of course, after Theo Epstein stepped down. Hoyer will now be responsible for charting the course forward for a Cubs team with a lot of questions this offseason. In fact, MLB.com's Mark Feinsand reported late last week that rival executives expect Hoyer to make significant changes to the roster this offseason. As we've talked about here on the show, Chris Bryant, Javier Baez, Anthony Rizzo, Kyle Schwarber, they're each slated to hit free agency after this upcoming season. Wilson Contreras after the next season. So there's a lot of big decisions that need to be made. Are some of these guys going to get traded? Are some of them going to get extended? Or are they just going to let them play out for their final year of their contract and see what happens? A lot of decisions for Hoyer to make here out of the gate for the Cubs. It's going to be an interesting offseason for them. How much do they shake things up? It sounds like executives of other teams are thinking they could shake things up pretty significantly. In a press conference yesterday, Mets president Sandy Alderson said that the team will not be hiring a new president of baseball operations this winter and will instead focus its search on a new general manager. The 73-year-old Alderson said that the search for a new head of baseball operations has proven difficult due to limited access to certain candidates, and as a result, Alderson will essentially serve in that role, at least for now. As for the GM position, the Mets have interviewed roughly 6 candidates. A second round of interviews is likely to happen soon. A couple other things of note from that press conference. Alderson definitively confirmed that Luis Rojas will be back as Mets manager in 2021. Rojas saying in a statement, "I'm thrilled to be the manager under the leadership of Sandy and to try to win a World Series. We look forward to putting in the work and making our fans proud." A final note from Alderson, he said the team has no immediate plans to release veteran second baseman Robinson Cano following his 162-game suspension for PEDs. As we've talked about, Cano will forfeit his entire $24 million salary for 2021, but he's still owed $48 million over the next 2 seasons after that. Major League Baseball announced yesterday tentative plans for the Field of Dreams game in 2021. The White Sox are now scheduled to host the Yankees in Dyersville, Iowa in August at a temporary ballpark that's been built next to the Field of Dreams movie set. The game was supposed to take place this past summer, and then it was adjusted for the Cardinals to take the place of the Yankees, given the regional scheduling of 2020. But then it was postponed altogether after the Cardinals battled a COVID-19 outbreak. There were problems across the league at that point. So now tentative plans for the White Sox and Yankees to have that game in August 2021. A few other quick notes here. Pittsburgh Pirates general manager Ben Cherington said on MLB Network Radio recently that right-hander Jameson Taillon is on track to be ready for opening day as he continues his rehab from Tommy John surgery. The Brewers have promoted Matt Arnold to senior vice president and general manager. Their president of baseball operations, David Stearns, announced that move last week. Yankees closer Aroldis Chapman has had his 3-game suspension for throwing near the head of Tampa Bay's Mike Brosseau reduced to 2 games. That according to a report from MLB Network's John Heyman last week. Finally, late last week, there were a few notable players designated for assignment by their clubs in order to clear room for prospects on their 40-man roster. And those players are now set to hit free agency, the players who were DFA'd. A couple of notable names: Baltimore first baseman and DH Renato Nunez, who led the team in home runs over the past 2 seasons, hitting 31 in 2019. He's going to be a free agent. Pirates right-hander Trevor Williams and outfielder Jose Ozuna. And a notable one here, Tampa Bay outfielder Hunter Renfroe was DFA'd by the Rays. The 28-year-old acquired last December in a trade with the Padres. The former first-round pick hit just 156 in 42 games in 2020, but of course, he did have a couple of home runs for the Rays in the postseason. And that is our quick hits for today. Final topic for this first segment of the show is, as we've talked about here on other episodes, we go through some of the latest hot stove rumblings, reaction to at least recent reports about potential trades and signings. So here's a couple of notable things from the past few days, and there's a lot to keep up with. So this isn't everything. These are just some notable reports that I think are worth mentioning and keeping in mind moving forward. Mark Feinsand of MLB.com reporting that the Rays have informed teams they're open to trading Blake Snell. Now, according to Feinsand, Snell has been informed that a trade is possible, but the team is not actively shopping him. And the 27-year-old, according to Feinsand's reporting, would like to remain in Tampa Bay. Snell is set to make $39 million in the final 3 seasons of a 5-year deal with the Rays. And speaking of the Rays, the Athletics' Jim Bowden reported over the weekend the team has made it clear to other teams that a big priority for them this offseason is adding a catcher, and that makes complete sense because Mike Zunino and Michael Perez, who were the 2 primary options for them this past season behind the plate, are both gone to free agency, and the top of the depth chart right now is a minor leaguer who hasn't spent a single game in the major leagues. Of course, some of the top options on the market are JT Realmuto and James McCann, and of course Realmuto would be a big surprise for the Rays to sign given the contract he's expected to command, but there's James McCann, Yadier Molina, former Ray, Wilson Ramos, and Kurt Suzuki are other options out there as well. The Blue Jays are expected to be aggressive this offseason, and there's new reporting backing up that sentiment. Ken Rosenthal, The Athletic, reporting the team has had recent contact with Michael Brantley and Justin Turner, and that the team made a 3-year offer to Kevin Gausman before he accepted the Giants' qualifying offer. The Blue Jays have previously been connected to George Springer and DJ LeMahieu, so it seems like they're casting a very wide net in their search to improve their offense and take another step forward next season. The Nationals are considering a trade with the Cubs for all-star third baseman Chris Bryant, according to MLB.com's John Morosi. That would be, of course, a big significant thing. Bryant has been discussed as a potential trade chip for the Cubs. He's one of those players entering their final year with the team in terms of being under contract. Of course, the Nationals have a need at third base. Anthony Rendon is now in Los Angeles, so that could make some sense. Not sure how much the Nationals might be willing to give up for him, or if that's the direction the Cubs want to go. Maybe they'd rather trade someone else and extend Bryant. We'll just have to see how that plays out, but it's certainly a logical destination. Free agent slugger Nelson Cruz, he's unlikely to sign a new contract until it's clear whether or not we'll have a universal DH in 2021. That's according to a report from John Morosi, late last week, which makes complete sense. We still don't have anything definitive about whether there will be a DH in the National League in 2021. We've talked about that before, so not going to get into it specifically, but Cruz, of course, a DH only player at this point in his career, so it makes sense he's going to want to see this all play out before he makes a decision. If all of a sudden we find out there is going to be a DH in the NL definitively tomorrow, that could open up a lot of different teams just offering a good 1 or 2 year contract to Cruz. So not sure, though, when we're going to find out about that. Rockies third baseman Nolan Arenado been subject of trade rumors and discussions for a long time now, and Morosi reported over the weekend that the Dodgers are interested in trading for him, which is really no surprise. The Dodgers were interested in him last winter, and a deal never materialized. They ended up trading for Mookie Betts instead, and I think that worked out pretty well for them. But they now have a vacancy at third base. Justin Turner is hitting free agency, so the Dodgers have an opening at third. They have the resources to make a deal like that, but of course, it's tricky. We'll talk about that actually later in the show today. Trading Arenado is a tricky situation, so who knows if anything will happen there, but of course it makes sense the Dodgers would be connected. And DJ LeMahieu, the free agent second baseman, in recent days, the Nationals, Blue Jays, and Mets have all been connected to him along with the Yankees. There's been previous reporting that he wants to stay in New York, so it could come down to the Yankees and Mets, but maybe if the Blue Jays, in their aggressive search for more offense, make a big offer to LeMahieu, maybe he changes his mind if on the wanting to be a New York thing, assuming that that's true. So one of the big free agents of the offseason, and a really underrated name, a really fun player, DJ LeMahieu. Of course, he's had incredible past 2 seasons with the Yankees, so we'll see how that all plays out. All right, we're going to go ahead and take our first break of the broadcast today. When we come back, we're going to dive right into the AL and NL West offseason previews. We'll discuss moves that have been made thus far by these teams, a quick look back at their 2020 performances, what they learned from that, what their key questions are, what their key needs are this offseason. We'll do that for all of the AL and NL West teams coming up next here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back into this Tuesday, November 24th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. Here at 110sportsmedia.com, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, where you can just search for 110 Sports to get all of our latest shows, podcasts, and more. Time to dive now into, as promised, our off-season division previews for the West divisions. We're going to start with the AL West. And basically, we've been doing these for the other divisions, the Central divisions, the East divisions. We're going to go through each team in these divisions. We're going to talk a little bit about a reminder how this past season went, what the big lesson was learned, what grade I gave them for this past season, if they've done anything notable so far this offseason, and what are some of the key questions and needs for this team this winter. So it's kind of a lot, but I'll try to boil it down into just a couple of main ideas for each team. And we're going to start, of course, with the AL West, like I said, where we had just one team finish above 500 in 2020 in the shortened season. That was the Oakland Athletics. The Houston Astros made the playoffs as one of two teams that made the playoffs despite finishing under 500. And the rest of the division, there was a lot of underperformance when it comes to underperforming expectations, from the Angels to the Angels to the Rangers. Of course, the Mariners are still in the midst of a rebuild. So we'll talk about those teams as we get to them. We're going to start, though, with the Houston Astros. As I pull those notes up here we go. The Houston Astros. Of course, expectations were high for this team entering the season, in their first season following the sign stealing scandal, but they were the preseason World Series favorites, but they struggled, of course, as I mentioned. They finished with a below 500 record for the first time since 2014. They had a lot of key injuries, a lot of underperforming core hitters. And at the same time, of course, you got to give credit to the Astros for pushing through those injuries and those underperformance. Dusty Baker leading the club to the playoffs as the sixth seed in the American League field. And after that, Houston's collective postseason experience kind of took over. They defeated the Twins and the A's the first two rounds of the playoffs, almost came back against the Rays in the ALCS, but fell short in that series to end their season. So I gave them a C grade for the season. Because, of course, a deep postseason run like that usually gets you a higher grade, but given the expectations for them, I couldn't get too high with that grade. But the big lesson learned for them that came from the postseason is that their window for contention is still wide open, I should say. Justin Verlander's going to be out all of next year after Tommy John surgery. The club could lose George Springer and Michael Brantley in free agency. So yeah, there are some concerns. But aside from those guys, the rest of the Astros roster is pretty much set to return. Bregman, Correa, Altuve, Gurriel, all going to be back, as well as breakout outfielder Kyle Tucker. Jordan Alvarez going to come back from injury and be the DH, and a solid rotation, along with some young bullpen arms that are interesting. The Astros are still in a good position to make a deep postseason run next season. There are a couple key questions for them this offseason, but really it's just a couple. It's those outfielders that are the big question for the Astros. So the key questions for them, like I said, will Springer be re-signed? It seems like Brantley would be more likely. There's a good chance that Springer, as one of the very top position players in the free agent market this offseason, is going to leave for a bigger contract elsewhere. That seems likely at this point. But there's also a chance that the Astros are able to re-sign him. Another question, maybe we see a contract extension for Carlos Correa. He's set to hit free agency after next season, so maybe we see that this offseason. But their needs this offseason are very clear. It's the outfield. Jackie Bradley Jr., they've been connected to him. Maybe Jock Peterson is a fit. They could also use some bullpen help, some veteran bullpen help to go alongside some of those intriguing young relievers. But generally speaking, it's a couple of key areas for the Astros, and they're going to be in good position to compete again in 2021. Next team I want to discuss is the Los Angeles Angels. No team in baseball in 2020, in my estimation, was a bigger disappointment than the Angels. They brought in Joe Maddon. They signed Anthony Rendon. They had Shohei Ohtani returning as a two-way player. They had Mike Trout. And they still missed the postseason, despite the expanded field and playing in a division that was incredibly weak. Their offense was about normal, slightly above average, but their team ERA was in the bottom 5 in the league. Dylan Bundy had a breakout year, but there wasn't much else consistent in the rotation. And the Angels finished in 4th place in the division. And they learned that they need significant pitching help, because starters not named Dylan Bundy posted a 6.23 ERA in 2020. The bullpen didn't do very well either, and they blew an MLB high 14 saves. So there are some offensive holes, but the big thing for the Angels this offseason is they need pitching. They need a way to upgrade their pitching staff. That's one of the big questions for them, and I projected that Trevor Bauer would sign there. I mean, that would be huge for them to have that ace and have him and Bundy at the top of that rotation. They need to do something when it comes to their pitching. Otherwise, I don't know how we can expect a different result. They also have some questions at closer. I don't think they probably won't spend big there, in my estimation, but they need to bring in some veteran, somebody. And if they don't bring in, the star, if they don't pay up for Trevor Bauer, and we don't know what contract he's going to demand in this market, then I don't know. You got to go after Masahiro Tanaka or Jake Odorizzi or somebody to help try to stabilize that rotation. Because the Angels are really top heavy in terms of a couple of offensive stars, where if they don't work out, then you're in trouble because your rotation's not very deep either. So they need answers. They also need a middle infielder because Andrelton Simmons is a free agent. Tommy La Stella is a free agent. David Fletcher had a good year last year. He'll be in the middle infield, but maybe they sign a shortstop like Marcus Semien or Didi Gregorius, or a second baseman like Colton Wong. They're in a tricky spot. I mean, they got to do something. This is a lot of money in this team, and Mike Trout is getting older every year and still not making the postseason. And they need to do something, and I think adding Trevor Bauer would be big for them. That was one of my predictions. All right, next team I want to discuss here is the Oakland Athletics, and I should mention I gave the Angels an F grade because, like I said, biggest disappointment in my estimation last year. The Oakland Athletics I gave an A-. They took advantage of the Astros' struggles. They dethroned Houston. They won the AL West for the first time since 2013. They were a really good team. Second best record in the American League, only behind the Rays. And they weathered the loss of Matt Chapman. And they had some of their hitting stars who weren't doing as well as they normally do, because they had the 5th best team ERA in baseball, the the top-ranked bullpen ERA. They snapped a streak of 9 straight losses in winner-take-all postseason games, defeating the White Sox in the Wild Card Series, but then they lost to the Astros in the ALDS. The big lesson learned for them, the team made strides, but again, it's the same result at the end of the day for the A's that they were hoping to avoid at the end of the season, a relatively early knockout from the postseason. Their top-end talent just doesn't quite measure up. They're a team full of good and exciting players. They're very likable. They can compete against the best, but against the best of the best, it's clear that just roster depth, determination, it can only get you so far most of the time. Star power does matter, and the A's just haven't had quite the star power to match up against the very best teams in baseball. Key questions for them this offseason: will Marcus Semien return? He's been the longest tenured A's player that was on their roster this past year. Shortstop had a breakout 2019, struggled a bit this past year. Unclear what kind of contract he might get. He could try to rebuild his value on a one-year deal, in which case maybe he returns, or if he gets a 2 or 3 year deal, he's probably leaving. There's also questions about the ninth inning, as Liam Hendriks has been their closer. He's going to get a big deal. It's going to be somewhere other than Oakland. They have questions in the middle infield, both spots right now, so they could use an addition there. Don't expect them to go big and add TJ LeMahieu, but a smaller deal, a Cesar Hernandez, a Colton Wong, a Freddie Galvis, something like that could be in the cards for the A's. They also could use some proven bullpen arms because they have several high-leverage relievers who are now free agents in addition to in addition to Liam Hendriks. And so they could re-sign a few of those guys, but I could also see something like a Sergio Romo, a Trevor Rosenthal, an Alex Colomé, if their price isn't too high, being fits for the Oakland Athletics this offseason. All right, second to last team to discuss here in the AL West is the Seattle Mariners. I gave them a B grade for their 2020 season. Of course, they didn't make the postseason, but again, these grades that I gave out a couple weeks ago for the full season are relative to expectations and circumstances for these individual teams. So this was the second year of a rebuilding effort for the Mariners, and considering that, it went about as well as you could expect because they were not too far out of the playoff picture down the stretch. They ended up as the first team outside of the playoffs in the American League. They weren't all that close, but that's of the teams that made it, they were the first team out. So that means something. And for a team, again, in the midst of a rebuilding process, they also learned about some of their young talent and added some young talent, and they've got a bright future. Center fielder Kyle Lewis was the unanimous winner of the AL Rookie of the Year award. They had a couple pitchers, Justice Sheffield, Justin Dunn, showing promise in the rotation. Utility man Dylan Moore impressed with an .855 OPS. They added highly regarded outfield prospect Taylor Trammell in a trade with the Padres. Top prospect Jared Kelenic isn't far from making his debut. Things are looking up for the Mariners, and 2020 was an indication of that. That the rebuild is heading in the right direction. They have questions this offseason. Well, how do they address the bullpen? It was the worst in the American League this past season in terms of ERA. They don't have many experienced options. Don't expect them to necessarily spend big on one, but there's just a lot of pitchers out there with late inning experience who probably won't be too expensive. So I think that's going to be one of their number one priorities this offseason. Of course, really for the Mariners, though, the question is going to be, the next wave of prospects. When do they arrive? Questions that aren't going to be answered this winter. But as far as this offseason, I think maybe a cheap starter gets added, but I think veteran bullpen help is the big priority for the Mariners. Don't expect a huge offseason for them, but I think focusing in on that bullpen, that's going to be the key. Final team to discuss here in the AL West is the Texas Rangers, who I gave a D grade for their 2020 performance. It was a truly horrendous season for the Rangers in 2020. Worst record of the American League, worst winning percentage since 1973. They were 23rd in team ERA. They were 29th in runs scored and OPS. There were few positives to speak of on this Rangers team, outside of Lance Lynn, throwing an MLB high 84 innings with a 3.32 ERA. There's some encouraging young players on this Rangers team, but there's very little in terms of certain production heading into the offseason. Production they can count on. Guys that you can say, oh, wow, he's a lock at that spot, and he's going to give us good production, whether it be a position player or pitcher. There's just very few of those guys right now. They learned this year that a quick rebuild wasn't going to get the job done. A larger rebuild is probably necessary at this point. They tried to do it quickly, tried to on-the-fly rebuild. They added Corey Kluber. I mean, they had Corey Kluber coming back, and Mike Minor and Lance Lynn, and some reasons to believe they could maybe make a run at a playoff spot. One of those, especially with the playoff field expanded, that if things broke right, they could be somewhat competitive. But things did not break right. Mike Minor was bad. He got traded. Corey Kluber got injured. Didn't even finish his first start. Elvis Andrus took a major step back at the plate. Joey Gallo was inconsistent. There were just no proven top-tier bats around Gallo in the lineup. And so it looks like it's going to probably take a few years for the Rangers to be competitive again. They're not in a great spot right now. They're not in a great spot at all. It can be changed relatively quickly. It's not a hopeless situation, but they're not in a great spot. They need an offensive boost because they had the lowest batting average, on-base percentage, and slugging percentage in the American League. Their number 3 hitters in the lineup hit 145 collectively. Like, they just have no proven hitters that they can count on in that lineup, aside from an inconsistent Joey Gallo, which by definition you can't really count on him for too much more than a lot of home runs and a lot of strikeouts. They also have questions in the closer spot. That's not really a big overall concern. So yeah, they could use some impact bats. They could go out and sign Marcell Ozuna, but they're not really in that spot right now. I don't think that would be a good idea for them. I think it's going to be marginal ads. Maybe they add a Carlos Santana, Ryan Braun, somebody, a veteran who can come in on a short-term deal and just add a little stability to the lineup in the meantime. But they're not in a great spot. And that's our AL West offseason preview. A very quick break here. When we come back, we'll dive into the NL West here on Around the Bases. All right, time to dive into the NL West divisions, the final division to discuss here in terms of what you might be able to expect and what these teams' situations are heading into this winter. The NL West featured some new competition for the Dodgers, who of course went on to win the World Series. It featured some new competition for the Dodgers, but also some clubs with relatively high expectations that fell well short of them as well. Arizona Diamondbacks are first up, and they got an F grade from me for their 2020 performance. They were right up there with the Angels in terms of the biggest disappointments of 2020. The team added Madison Bumgarner, Cole Calhoun, and Starling Marte in the offseason, and they had 3 returning regulars who posted an OPS above 825 in 2019. So they were in a good position. It seemed like they were going for it. But all 3 of those players, Eduardo Escobar, Ketel Marte, Christian Walker, they all took a significant step back at the plate this past season. Bumgarner's first season with Arizona was a complete disaster. Starling Marte found himself traded to the Marlins at the trade deadline. And Robbie Ray and Archie Bradley were also dealt, as the D-backs finished a very forgettable season with the second worst record in the National League. Now, the big lesson learned is 2020 was disappointing, but an complete overhaul is not necessary. There's reason to agree with the front office in their assessment that the building blocks for a successful team still exist. Calhoun's coming off a strong season. Marte, Walker, Escobar, they should all bounce back to some degree next season. There's also a solid top 3 in the rotation with Zach Gallen and Caleb Smith and Bumgarner, who they have to hope is going to bounce back. There were some positive signs from him near the end of the year. This isn't a team devoid of any high-end talent, but they're not in a great situation either. The key questions for them this offseason: Are they going to be willing to spend again? Last off season they were coming off a good year, and they decided to try to add some pieces in Baumgartner and Marte, but that didn't work out. So will the team try again and add a relatively high profile free agent, or will they say, yeah, that didn't work, let's just see if we can get some guys to get back on track instead? They also have to address the back end of their bullpen because Archie Bradley and Andrew Chafin are both gone. They were both traded. So they've got some free agents. They could use somebody proven for the back end of their bullpen. There's a lot of options, so I'm not going to start listing them. There's some ideas that I had in the article. It's on the website right now. Or actually, that will be going on the website later this week, I should say. Some offseason needs for the Diamondbacks. They could use some productive bats. They're not going to sign George Springer or DJ LeMahieu most likely, but maybe Jackie Bradley, Tommy LaStella, Colton Wong, something to add some stability. It's really hard to know what they're thinking right now and how much money they might be willing to spend. They could also use some rotation depth as well. Not really super optimistic about the Diamondbacks heading into this offseason, but they're not also in a horrible position either. The Colorado Rockies, I gave a D+ for their 2020 performance. They were one of the biggest early season surprises this past year. They jumped out to a 12-5 start, and all of a sudden there was a lot of hype around the Colorado Rockies, a lot of buzz, articles being written about them, and then they completely collapsed. Their record the rest of the way, 14-39. German Marquez, Kyle Freeland, Antonio Senzatella, it's actually a pretty strong trio atop their rotation, something they haven't had a lot of. But they still finished 29th in baseball in team ERA, and they couldn't make up for it with an offense that was 25th in OBP, 22nd in home runs. Trevor Story and Charlie Blackmon were pretty good, but they didn't get much support, and Nolan Arenado had a down year as he battled a shoulder injury. And so the Rockies are in a bit of a strange spot right now. They've got the starting pitching core of a competitive team. They've got the star hitters. Yet they're coming off back-to-back fourth-place finishes in the division. Story and Arenado could potentially leave at the end of 2021. The budget is tight. Younger players aren't taking the steps forward that the club hoped. So something needs to change, but we can't expect the Rockies to sign a big free agent. The team's going to have to be smart on upgrades to its bullpen, and young hitters are simply going to have to do better. And that core is going to have to do well for things to change in 2021. It's a weird spot for the Rockies right now. I know I've said that for a few teams, but it's a really weird spot the Rockies are in right now. Couple questions. Well, will Nolan Arenado get traded this winter? That's a big one. We talked about him being connected to the Dodgers, but he's expressed his displeasure with their front office last spring, and he can opt. But the tricky thing is with him, he can opt out of his contract at the end of next season. So they could try to trade Arenado. They get some salary relief to do other things, but they might try to trade him because they're afraid of him walking away next offseason without getting something in return. But a trade this offseason is not going to be easy because potential suitors for Arenado are going to be only guaranteed 1 year before he could opt out. So they want a value for him, but the teams that might be interested are going to say, well, how do we know we're going to have him more than a year? They don't. So it's a tricky situation. He's been connected to the Dodgers. He's been connected to the Cardinals. We'll see if he actually gets moved. How can the bullpen be repaired? That's another question for the Rockies. Their reliever ERA was 6.77 in 2020, so they could use a experienced free agent addition. I know I've said this with so many teams, but there are a lot of experienced veteran relievers out there. So we'll see if they strike with adding one or two of them. So like I said, experienced bullpen help. They could also use another proven hitter. I don't think they're going to spend big, but maybe Mitch Moreland, Carlos Santana. Somebody could come in and help play at first base. We'll have to see. The Dodgers are the next team up, and this is an easy one I don't have to get into very much because they got an A+. They were indisputably the best team in baseball in 2020. Top 2 in runs, home runs, OPS, ERA, opponent's batting average. I mean, they were outstanding. And they relied on their combination of star power and depth, and they broke their 32-year championship drought. Mookie Betts finished second in NL MVP voting. Corey Seager was great. He was fully healthy. Clayton Kershaw dominated. You know the Dodgers. We've talked about the Dodgers. There's no reason to believe they can't do it again next year. They're the betting favorites to repeat in 2021, to win the World Series in 2021. Justin Turner is their only high-profile free agent, and they've got the resources to make big additions via trade or free agency this offseason if they feel like it. So their key questions: will Justin Turner return? He's been considered the heart and soul of the Dodgers, but he's getting up there in age. He's been very productive when healthy, but he has an injury history. He's getting up there in age. Defense isn't what it used to be, and the Dodgers could turn elsewhere, or they could bring him back on like a 2-year contract. There's also questions about the ninth inning. They could add a high-profile reliever. Kenley Jansen's got 1 year left on his contract, and he's not the dominant closer he used to be, so they could go out there and add a Liam Hendricks or something. We'll have to see. They could go out there and add a Trevor May, a Kirby Yates. They've got the resources to add one of those high-profile, experienced late-inning arms if they feel like it. And they could also use an answer at third base. So, whether it be re-signing Turner or trading for Chris Bryant or signing DJ LeMahieu and shifting guys around, or trading for Francisco Lindor and moving Corey Seager to third. There's a lot of options. The Dodgers have a lot of resources, so who knows what they could end up doing. The San Diego Padres are the next team up here to discuss in the NL West, and I give the Padres an A grade for 2020. No team in the league took as big of a step forward as the Padres. Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado, one of the best left sides of the infield in baseball. A strong rotation that got better when they added Mike Clevenger. Rookie Jake Cronenworth, veteran Will Myers, all these guys chipping in. The Padres ended the second longest playoff drought in the National League. They defeated the Cardinals in the first round of the playoffs, but with injuries playing a big role, injuries to starters, they didn't put up much of a fight against the Dodgers in the NLDS. The big lesson for them, look, they flipped the script. They were in the midst of rebuilding efforts and signings. They were making moves that they weren't getting anywhere. And all of a sudden, they shifted from being the laughingstock of the National League to one of the most exciting teams in baseball almost instantaneously this year. Tatis Jr., one of the faces of the game for years to come. The front office saw a team that was really good at the midway point of the season and said, let's make it better. And they were the most active team prior to the trade deadline. They took a huge step forward organizationally in 2020, and they're going to be one of the teams, the best teams in baseball, most exciting teams in baseball for several years to come. I really believe that. Their key questions this offseason, well, could they add another starter? Of course, we talked about it here on the show. We found out the other day that they've signed Mike Clevenger to a 2-year extension, but that he underwent Tommy John surgery and thus will miss the entire 2021 season. So if they're trying to match up well with the Dodgers, trying to stir things up, they've got a good rotation, but they could make a big move and sign a, Masahiro Tanaka, Jake Odorizzi, or maybe they trade for Lance Lynn or something. I mean, there's a whole bunch of possibilities for the Padres if they want to make their rotation significantly better for 2021. And that's one of my other questions for them. Is A.J. Preller going to run it back with the offense? Or is he going to make significant changes? This is a GM who's known to not be one to sit still when it comes to big moves. But that offense was incredible. There's a real case to be made that they don't have to make many changes to the offense except maybe add a couple bench pieces. Because all their starters at the position, all their position player starters are returning next year. So we'll see if Preller pushes the envelope, tries to make a move, make a splash with the offense, or if he sits still when it comes to the offense, because there's a case to be made, like I said, that that's the right thing to do. They're going to need some relief pitching because Kirby Yates and Trevor Rosenthal are both hitting the open market. So they could go after a veteran, just like some of these other names I mentioned, Trevor May, Alex Colomé. There's a lot of options out there, and like I said, a bench piece. But offensive overhaul, not necessary, though. We could see a big move. We'll just have to see. All right, the San Francisco Giants are the final team to discuss in the NL West, and I gave them a B grade for their 2020 performance because they exceeded expectations. They weren't an outstanding team, but they didn't make the playoffs, but they exceeded expectations for them. It's like again, factoring in the expectations, the circumstances for these clubs in the grades that I handed out. So I gave the Giants a B because they finished just under 500, the first team out of the NL playoff field. They had short-term deals with a couple of pitchers like Kevin Gausman and Drew Smyly and Trevor Cahill, and they paid off. The offense was surprisingly good. Finished top 5 in the NL in runs and OPS. Mike Yastrzemski, Alex Dickerson, the outfielders, they both broke out. And we learned that perhaps this core has one more run left in them. Brandon Belt, Brandon Crawford, Buster Posey, they've only got 1 year left on their contracts. Posey opted out of this past season after he and his wife were adopting twins that had been born prematurely. Belt had a career year at age 32. At the plate, Crawford had a bounce back season. Journeyman infielder Donovan Solano just won a Silver Slugger. They've got the talent to compete in 2021. That offense is surprisingly much better than I think everybody expected it to be. They've re-signed Kevin Gausman, who accepted their one-year, $18.9 million qualifying offer. Some of the questions for them, they promoted their top catching prospect, their top prospect overall, Joey Bart, and he had some growing pains. Buster Posey's going to be back in 2021, so how does that all play out? They also need some more help for the rotation. They re-signed Gausman, but they're going to need some other guys too, because that was a weakness for them. They've got some free agents. Don't think it's going to be high caliber options, but I think they're going to bring in somebody to help anchor the rotation alongside Gausman, or at least they should. So again, their offseason needs more starting pitching. They're not going to sign Trevor Bauer most likely, but maybe a Corey Kluber, a James Paxton, a Mike Minor, a Rich Hill, something like that to help add some stability to the rotation. They could also use some veterans, a veteran addition for the bullpen, maybe somebody cheap in terms of the contract cost. Mark Melanson, Sean Doolittle are a couple ideas. They've got an interesting bullpen, but a young bullpen. So some additions there would be helpful. But again, the Giants all of a sudden, hey, maybe they've got another run left in them. That's my big observation from 2020. Another run left in them with this core, the Posey, Crawford, Belt core. Maybe there's one more chance for them to make a run at it coming up next season. But that's going to do it for our NL West off-season preview. We're going to take our final break of the show. Coming up next, what's on deck, both in the baseball world and here at 110 Sports in the coming days and weeks. That's coming up next here on the 110 Sports Network. Welcome back one final time to this Tuesday, November 24th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. I'm Chris Brown. Just time for What's on Deck, and it's going to be twofold today. Let's start with what's on deck in the baseball world, and the answer is not too much in terms of key dates or deadlines this week, being that it is Thanksgiving week. Typically a somewhat quieter week in the baseball off season, though, we could have a couple of key free agent signings happen at any point. But no key deadlines, no key dates to know about this week. Next real big deadline of the offseason or key date of the offseason is next Wednesday, a week from tomorrow, December 2nd. That is the non-tender deadline. Excuse me, and that means that is the deadline for teams to offer their pre-arbitration and arbitration eligible players a contract for 2021. Players who don't receive one are considered non-tendered and become free agents. That happens with players who are entering their final years of team control, whose price is getting too steep for their club. Usually it's not stars who get non-tendered, but some good players can be non-tendered, particularly by clubs who are looking to cut costs and save money. A few of the notable players this offseason who could end up being non-tendered: White Sox outfielder Nomar Mazara, Rockies starting pitcher John Gray, Royals DH Jorge Soler, who's projected to make $7 to $9 million, Detroit starter Matt Boyd, the the Cubs Kyle Schwarber, who's projected to make $7 to $9 million. That would be a surprise, as would Soler to some degree, but it's something that you can't rule out given the financial uncertainty of this offseason and teams looking to cut costs. Uh, Blue Jays third baseman Travis Shaw and Minnesota outfielder Eddie Rosario, who's projected to make somewhere around $8 to $13 million in arbitration. So we could see some relatively high-profile players get non-tendered ahead of next week's deadline. And those players would become free agents, some of them pretty high-profile free agents if it happened. If it happens, so like Eddie Rosario, good chance he gets non-tendered by the Twins. They have some other outfield options, and that could be a way to help them save money to make a run at a pitcher or a return of Nelson Cruz or something like that. All of a sudden, Eddie Rosario is a free agent. That's a quality outfield bat entering the free agent market. So that's something that all of a sudden changes that picture a little bit, and all of a sudden, a couple teams, there's going to be, if Rosario was non-tendered, ends up non-tendered, there's going to be a pretty good market for him. A lot of teams would like that kind of bat in their lineup. Not, at a high cost, but a lot of teams would be interested, I have to think. But that's the next key date you can expect coming up. That's next Wednesday, a week from tomorrow. That's the non-tender deadline. As for what's coming up on deck here, as for what's on deck with Around the Bases with 110 Sports, we're going to be changing our live streaming setup and our schedule starting next week. And we'll have some announcements on what you can expect on that coming up. We're really excited about it. We're going to be having continue with live shows every day of the week, every weekday, couple hours, multiple hosts bringing you the latest information and storylines, discussing the big storylines from the sports world, from all the major leagues. So we'll talk about, we'll let you know about what's happening with that coming up later this week, about what you can expect. So that does mean some changes, though, for Around the Bases. This is the last typical Tuesday, Thursday broadcast of Around the Bases in the form that it's been in since before the 2020 MLB season started. So thank you so much for everyone who's tuned into this broadcast throughout the regular season, into the off season. We've had a lot to talk about. It's been a great experience for me. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun, and thank you so much for tuning in, whether it be live, whether it be in podcast form, whether it be on demand on the website or YouTube. Really appreciate the support. So no more Around the Bases in terms of this setup, but it's not the end of Around the Bases completely. We're going to be sending out some information about what you can expect coming up, but this broadcast will be shifting into more of a on-demand, shorter show / podcast that will come out every week. Details on that, like I said, coming up. But Around the Bases will not be completely gone. We will still be a on-demand show focusing on the big storylines from the week and discussing the biggest couple storylines from the week. That's going to be coming up soon. It's going to be available in podcast form, in on-demand show form. So more details on that coming up. So between our coverage of Major League Baseball that will be on the website 110sportsmedia.com, continuing throughout the offseason, and also as a part of our live show to be announced beginning next week, we will still have you covered when it comes to Major League Baseball here at 110 Sports. So Round the Bases is not completely done. It is changing a little bit. Again, it'll be shifting into a different type of show, an on-demand podcast and show that will be available on our website, on podcast platforms and whatnot. Details on that to come, but really excited about the changes that we have coming to our live streaming schedule next week, so stay tuned for updates on that here at 110 Sports. Our live stream, our live shows will be taking a bit of a break here down the stretch of this week with the Thanksgiving holiday, but we'll still have coverage for you, some different stories coming out on the website, 110sportsmedia.com. So make sure to check those out and subscribe to the 110 Sports newsletter on our website. You'll get the latest written content, links to all our shows, and everything delivered to your inbox every Friday. But again, thanks so much for watching this episode of Around the Bases, for tuning in at any point this past season and this offseason. Really appreciate it. Have a great Thanksgiving, stay safe, and I'll talk to you again next week.